Hello, everyone. Welcome to TIFF Stay at Home Cinema, brought to you by TIFF and Crave. We're streaming live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and at tiff.net/stay-at-home. My name is Cameron Bailey. I'm the co-head and artistic director at TIFF. Thanks for joining us. Tonight, we're watching Blinded by the Light, starting at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 4:30 p.m. on the North American West Coast. And our special guest is the director of the film, Gurinder Chadha. Before we get started, a few shout-outs. We are on Indigenous land, and I'd like to acknowledge Indigenous storytellers from coast to coast to coast. We'd like to thank all of the frontline workers who've been working for the past 4 months, over 4 months, and we're still working to keep us safe and healthy and fed. I want to thank all of TIFF's government partners, the Government of Canada, the Government of Ontario, and the City of Toronto. They've been longtime supporters of everything we do. And big thanks also to our corporate partners, our lead sponsor, Bell, our major sponsors, RBC, L'Oreal Paris, and Visa. And thanks also to the individual donors and members, maybe you're one of them, for supporting us, especially right now. Writer, director, producer Gurinder Chadha is one of the most beloved and prolific filmmakers coming out of Britain. Her films include Budgie on the Beach, which was at the Toronto Film Festival in 1993, It Like Beckham, which has been everywhere, Bride and Prejudice, Angus Thongs and Perfect Snogging, It's a Wonderful Afterlife, Viceroy's House, and most recently, Blinded by the Light. Her films are really unique, singular, because they deal with difficult issues, family, community, personal expression, race, culture, migration, but they do it with a lot of humor, a lot of warmth, a lot of understanding, and she's never afraid to take the piss when she needs to. Gurinder, welcome to Stay at Home Cinema.
Thank you. Lovely to be here, and great to be at TIFF again, virtually.
Yes. Thanks so much for having me. Now, I was told, I was not there that year, I don't think, but I was told that you met your partner, Paul, in Toronto when you first brought Budgie to the festival.
Yes, it was Budgie on the Beach, and 1992. 93. He's just reminding me. Thanks, Paul. 93, and he was in the audience at the theatre, but he was too shy to come up to me after the film because there were quite a lot of people around me after the film. And the next day I was walking into the Sutton Place Hotel, I think it was called, right? It was the festival hotel. So I was walking in and he was walking out, and he stopped me and told me how much he liked my film. And he said he ran a film festival, Asian American Film Festival in San Francisco. Right. And he gave me his card and said, would I go? And I remember looking at him going, oh, he's really good looking, but he's a bit young. That's what I remember. And then I took his card and I said, well, it's Asian American. I said, of course I'll support it. And that's how we met. And then I went over to the festival and we met again, and then I brought him back to London.
That's fantastic.
It all started in Toronto, definitely started in Toronto. And it's such a great city. I mean, I've been there many times. Recently, we had the It Like Beckham musical on at the theatre there, at the Blumenthal Theatre. And you know, it's a great city. In some ways, it's a bit like London. You know, it has incredible diversity and it's very exciting. There's lots of stuff to do. You know, it's just the winters are a bit colder, I'd say.
Yes, they are. Although they're getting warmer every year. So we'll see what the next 50, 100 years bring. I want to ask you about the origins of Blinded by the Light. It's based on the life of Sarfraz Manzoor, who wrote a book called Greetings from Berry Park, I guess based on Asbury Park. Can you tell me a little bit about Sarfraz and about the origin, the story that the film is based on?
So I first saw Bruce Springsteen. I first heard him. I was about 17, and I had a Saturday job at Harrods in the record department. And somebody there said to me, have you heard of Bruce Springsteen? And I said, no, I'm not a rocker, you know. And he said, no, you should listen to him. And so I did. And I remember he handed me Born to Run, the album Born to Run. And when I opened it, it was this white guy and a black guy, like being really comfortable and pally with each other. And that's what struck me. I was like, I've never seen that before. That was so rare. The only time I had seen that was with Casey and the Sunshine Band. That was the only mixed band I'd ever seen. Everything else was always very separate, you know. And so that struck me first, that he was so warm and intimate with a black musician. And so then I took it home and heard it and loved it. And then fast forward, 84, I saw him live at Wembley for the first time. And that's when I was like a huge fan of his then after that. And then a bit later on from that, later in the 80s, I guess, maybe even the 90s, I saw an article by Safraz in the newspaper about Bruce Springsteen. And I was like, who the hell is this guy? I didn't even realize there was another Asian person that liked Bruce Springsteen as much as me. And that's how we connected, you know, because he's not the kind, you know, like I was also into Bhangra and all that and reggae, big time reggae fan. But Bruce is sort of a little different, I guess. But anyway, Safraz and I connected and I was like, wow, you know, you're a big fan. He goes, yeah. So then we kind of had a few nerdy meetings where we talked about the Coast of Tom Joad and all these sort of specific Bruce stuff. And then he said to me, you know what, I'm going to write a memoir. And I said, wow, that sounds awesome. You know, write it. Let me have a look at it. And he said as he was writing it, obviously Bend It Like Beckham had been a big hit by now. And in his heart, he was really hoping that I would like it because I was the only person who could turn it into a film. Okay. But when I read the memoir is very different to the film, by the way. But what I liked was that, you know, the basic story of a boy from Luton who is searching, you know, and Bruce Springsteen gives him the answers. And because I knew Bruce and Bruce's work intimately, you know, I could go deeper in a way, deeper than the book, actually, to find the film and find myself in the film too. And then we both started working on the screenplay. I wanted Safraz to work on it with me, you know, because he was actually a journalist, not a screenplay writer. But he was, you know, he brought lots of great information and journalistic nous, you know, to the project. And then, so then we started sort of working on it together. And then at some point, you know, it needed to become a screenplay. And that's the point where I said, right, I'm going to go away now, take everything and write the script, you know. And that was tricky because it's his life as well, and he's a journalist. But it needed to transcend. Yeah, it needed to transcend. Like I was desperate to make something different to Bend It Like Beckham. I didn't want to do the same idea of an Asian whose parents don't understand, and he needs to sort of, you know, he's fighting with his parents to get what he wants. I'd already done that, so I wanted to try and do something different here. And so I then sat down, and what I did was I took all the songs apart forensically, and then I started looking at the songs as dialogue, and then I started unpicking songs and putting them in scenes as if Bruce was talking as part of the dialogue. And that's when the magic happened, and that's when it suddenly lifted and became something else.
Interesting to me. So you said you were a fan from going back to working in the Harrods record department in the 1980s.
Yeah, when I was at school. Yeah.
About Springsteen at a very deep level with Safraz from the first time you met. Yeah. How did you become a fan? What was it in Bruce Springsteen's music and lyrics that actually drew you in to pay so much attention to it?
Well, I think it was the energy. I think that combination of saxophone and rock was different. I hadn't heard that kind of combo before. But I honestly think it was the politics. It was the fact that it was a mixed group, or here was, you know, a group that were, you know, because I had to wait for Two Tone to come along to see that again.
Yes.
You know, the special. That was then, you know, then. So before the specials, there was this, actually, you know. So there was Bruce Springsteen, the E Street Band. So I think that it was the politics really, but then once I got in, it was the storytelling. So what I liked about Bruce is that, I mean, I didn't know this then, but every song is like a little movie. It's a story, you know, it takes you in. It's very cinematic, you know, and I loved that. And also he talked about people on the margins.
Yeah.
Again, I hadn't really consolidated those ideas back then when I first heard him, but he was talking about people on the margins. He was talking about workers. He was talking about migrants. He was talking about people who go to war, people who are on the edge, you know. And so I think subliminally all that is, you know, fed into what I was thinking. You know, for me, it was really when the riots happened in Britain in the early 80s, you know, that's when we all consolidated our identity as British and, you know, Asian or black or whatever. But it took the riots in the 80s for us to start asking those questions. And I think prior to that, we were always on the back foot because our parents had come to Britain, and our parents were seeing a lot of the wrath of the right wing, the National Front, you know, and we were too, but we were sort of in a rock and a hard place because we were quite anglicized, maybe, you know, but at the same time, you know, we didn't want to diss our parents. And so, you know, being on the margins at that point, you know, I think Bruce really spoke to me, definitely, at that point.
You talk about Springsteen's lyrics talking about people who are marginalized, and you talk about the National Front, you know, really hardcore racist action in the streets in the UK. This is all pretty heavy stuff, serious stuff, but your movies are so delightful. There's so much fun. There's so much humor in them. And I wonder, because I am sure that is quite conscious a strategy on your part. Can you talk a little bit about attacking this really heavy stuff with humor?
Well, I think, you know, when you grow up like me and you work in an industry that doesn't really have people who tell stories like from your background, you know, so you are always, you know, the anomaly, you know, and also you always have to fight to get your stories told, you know, because they're not valued necessarily commercially or, you know, by that industry, you know. So being that person has just made me really strategize. And so I try and find ways to tell my stories so that they satisfy me, but also satisfies many other people as possible, you know. And I come up with the stories in their inception like that, you know, and then I follow that through. But also, you know, it's important that we do tackle our experiences in terms of race and being marginalized and colonialism, you know, all these things that are passed down, you know, these traumas really that our parents experience and we experience. But we also live in a society that likes to define us by those experiences, likes to define us in terms of race and the problematic. So I grew up at a time where race was the problem, and me being who I was the problem. And people thought that I had an identity crisis because I didn't know if I was English or Indian. And I remember teachers saying that, and I'm going, well, I know that obviously with my family, I'm going to behave one way. And when I'm at school with my school friends, I'll be a different way. And I know I'm not going to speak Punjabi with my friends at school, you know, but at home, you know, we'll talk about this. And at school, I'll talk about pop music. And, you know, so there was no crisis for us. But other people who are monocultural and monolingual don't often understand what being bilingual or multicultural means. It means that we can easily move, you know, we're fluid culturally. Yeah. And so I started making films in what I would like to call a sort of, a hybrid sort of genre that not many people do, actually. Slowly we're seeing more. I mean, in the past, when I was making films, the other filmmaker I would say who did this was Ang Lee with Wedding Banquet.
Right.
Ang Lee was like fluid as well in that way, and commercial.
Yeah.
So that was the big thing for me, was that I wanted to be commercial. I wanted to make films that as many people around the world would see, because I didn't want to make art house films that would be studied in universities, or in film schools alone. Like, it was important for me that I gave strength and entertainment to my cousins, for example, all over the world, my community. But at the same time, I totally understood that there were other people who were going through experiencing life just like us, different diasporas, people from different diasporas, whose stories weren't being articulated. So I always knew I had a much bigger audience than the Asian audience, although the industry just kept telling me that, which is why I made films like What's Cooking back in years ago. That was 1999. But that was a film that looked at LA through 4 families. It just so happened that the 4 American families were African American, Latin American, Vietnamese American, and Jewish American. And that was really unusual at the time, but that's how I saw LA. It's very common now, but when I wanted to make that film, everyone was like, well, what is it? Is it a black film? Is it a Latina film? We don't know what it is. We don't know how to market it, So I've been through quite a lot of experiences which continue to try and marginalize me. And so the more people try and marginalize me, the more I go,
Not
I'm going to go.
So, look, we're at a particular moment right now where we're talking about race again. We're talking about culture. We're talking about the marginalization that's still been going on. And maybe it started in the streets with police violence, but it's now, it's everywhere. And I know that in the UK, there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of who gets to tell stories on screen, what companies look like, what cinemas look like, all of those kinds of things. Same here in Canada, same in the US and so many other places. Having been in this for decades, how does it look to you now, the current conversation?
Well, I think that what's great is that there is a conversation happening, I loved the way you introduced your talk by talking about acknowledging that you're on Indigenous land, like I've never heard that before, I think that's, we're certainly moving in the right direction. But I think as soon as you start bringing economics and money into it, I think, I fear that we'll go back to how we were, because for all this talk of more diversity, et cetera, I'm not sure how much my industry will actually change, actually.
Yeah.
And I hate saying that. I really hate saying that. But I think unless people like you and me are running studios, it ain't going to change, that's what we need, is people like us going, come on, let's open it up a bit. Let's see stories from a different perspective. Yes. That's the thing. Until that changes and we're still going, what about us? What about us? Hey, take a punt on us. You'll always have that situation, I think.
You said you had to fight to get your films made. Do you still have to fight?
Well, Blinded by the Light, I was like, wow, this is such a commercial film. I mean, Bruce Springsteen and I've made Bend It Like Beckham, and people know that stuff works. And I was like, God, this has got to be a slam dunk, hasn't it? So yeah, I mean, the first 2 places I sent it to was the BBC Films, and Film 4. And they both rejected it, for different reasons. Yeah. But they both rejected it. And I was like, are you kidding me? Really? Really?
Like, music, track record.
Yeah. Like I was like, of course, don't be so stupid. Of course you can't be acknowledged and rewarded for your success. Your industry doesn't do that. We have to start at the bottom every time, you know, with the wheel. So part of me was just like cross with myself for even thinking that, you know, differently. But then luckily, you know, I was like, okay, well, your loss. And then I just moved on and financed it differently. And it was great, you know. And then when we, you know, got our spectacular sales deal at Sundance, you know, it was great. It was, you know, it was vindication, you know, for me that, that, you know, there are people who want to hear these stories, and it's the gatekeepers who keep us out, really. So, yeah, unless we start becoming the gatekeepers, I think we'll always be left out.
Yes. Last thing I want to ask before we get to the film. It sounds like you know Springsteen very well. For those who are casual listeners and might just know the hits, what is an under-recognized album or track that you think people should listen to?
Oh, my God. How long have we got?
Oh, you go deep. Okay.
You know what? I would say sit back and just go on the journey. Sit back, go on the journey, because I will guarantee that you will come out and get onto your Spotify or Apple Music or whatever it is and put in Bruce Springsteen's Essentials, you know, and you will start listening to it. That is what everyone is saying. After they watch the film, they have Springsteen on all weekend.
Over and over again. Yes.
I do it. And I think with Springsteen, you know, with Bruce, you know, I want to tell you a couple of nice things about him before I go. You know, one was I went to see him on Broadway, and he had given us the green light for the script. You know, he really loved the script, and he respected Safraz too, because Safraz has seen it so many times. So the combination of me, Safraz, the script, he was like, okay, I'm all good with this. And so he gave us the green light. Then I said, I need quite a lot of songs. He was like, give her what she wants. Let her have all the songs. So it was quite remarkable. But at one point you'll see in the film, there's a sequence with the National Front, and I really wanted to use Jungle Land, you know, in this sequence, and I went to Paul. Just remind me here, Paul. Yeah. Just come here a minute. Sorry. So I wanted.
Is he?
Yeah, come here.
You're running out of time.
No.
Hey, Cameron.
Hey, how you doing, Paul?
We're doing great, doing good. You're talking about your parents.
Yeah. So what happened was, so basically we were with Springsteen, and I said, look, I really want to use Jungle Land, and the only place I can use it is here, but I'd need to cut it. I want to use the saxophone of Clarence, you know, because it's very soulful and it's very euphoric at the same time, and it's very moving. And I thought it was a tremendous piece of music to put under the National Front, all these figures of hate, you know. But then I also wanted to use the last word. But throughout the film, I never cut any of Bruce's songs. I just used them as is. But this one, I needed to take permission from him to cut it about. So I described the scene with the National Front, and I said what I wanted to do with Clarence's saxophone solo. And Bruce, you know, was like really thinking and really engaged, you know. And then he said, you know what, you should do it, because I think Clarence would really love that. And I was like, oh my God, you know, because Clarence died, right? Clarence died recently. So that was tremendous, you know. So I felt like I had Bruce's approval from that, but he never asked to see the finished film. And I was desperate for him to see my cut, because if there was anything he was worried about, I was, you know, it would have just killed me, you know. So I went to New York, took my director's cut, put it on for him. He was a little nervous, but he sat and he watched it, and he just like went on the journey. You know, at one point there's a whole Bhangra sequence, and he was like, huh? What's that about? He was like, what kind of thing, you know? I used lots of other 80s songs, you know, Tiffany, you know, all this. So he he loved all the other songs, you know, as well. But, you know, what was wonderful at the end of the film, you know, he gave me a big hug and he said, "Thank you for looking after me so beautifully." And that says so much about Bruce, you know, like, thank you for looking after me so beautifully. Like, so he had trusted me and he had trusted us with a story about a Pakistani kid in Luton, you know, very different to his experience.
Yeah.
And the experience of his songs, but he had made that jump. So just, you know, in terms of what we were saying about gatekeepers, you know, to me, that just said everything about what a great man he is and how he sees the world, you know, that he took a punt on us. And then we came up with this film that, I mean, never mind me, he has had so many people call him constantly saying how much they love the movie. And so, yeah, karma, it all worked out.
Gurinder, it's been great talking to you. Thank you so much for Blinded by the Light. We're going to get started now. We will press play on the film at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. That's 4:30 on the West Coast. I believe it's 12:30 in the morning if you're in the UK. We're watching on Crave if you're in Canada. If you're not in Canada, find Blinded by the Light wherever you can. And we're going to be live tweeting the screening using the hashtag TIFF at home. Gurinder, thanks again so much.
Thank you. All the best. Enjoy.